بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي ربنا زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصر أولياءك في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم انصرهم على عدوك وعدوهم إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم فرج عنا وعن إخواننا في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم نفس كربنا وكربهم وثبت أقدامنا وأقدامهم والطف بنا وبهم يا أرحم الراحمين يا رب العالمين. وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. So Henri Bergson, 1859 to 1941. French philosopher. Born in Paris, 1859. Like his German contemporaries, Husserl, Bergson's original training was in mathematics. Bergson won his first prize was in the mathematics for the prestigious Concours General, which led to the publication of his solution to the problem by Pascal in 1877. Bergson nevertheless chose to prepare for École Normale in the Letters of Humanities section. His math teacher, disappointed, famously claimed, You could have been a mathematician, you will be a mere philosopher." I wonder whether Russell knew that he was a mathematician. In 1870, Bergson became a French, although he could have chosen English citizenship. He was accepted at École Normale. He discovered Spencer with enthusiasm and studies under Bergson. Graduated from École Normale in 1881. He was the second was a highly selective. Thanks to a lecture entitled "What is the Value of Contemporary Psychology?" He began teaching post in the high school, as many French philosophers did. There he taught both at Lycée and at the university for the next 5 years. That's mostly about his life. We don't need to worry much about the concept of multiplicity. That's from where we will start. The concept of multiplicity. The concept of multiplicity has two fates in the 20th century: Bergsonianism and phenomenology. In phenomenology, multiplicity of phenomena is always related to a unified consciousness. Okay. In Bergsonianism, the immediate data of consciousness, le don immédiat de la conscience, are a multiplicity. Okay. Here, to and off indicate perhaps the most basic difference between Bergsonianism and phenomenology. I think he or she, whoever is the author, is using Bergsonianism rather than Bergson, because probably it includes other people like Deleuze as well. And obviously phenomenology is a huge school. So But the point he's trying to make, or she is trying to make, is here preposition to and of. So in phenomenology, the multiplicity of phenomena is always related to a unified. In Bergsonianism, the immediate data of consciousness are multiplicity. The immediate data of consciousness. Okay, so I would say at this point this is more subjective oriented. The way it's describing phenomenology, so data is presented too. So there. And this is more of a unified front. Bergsonianism, and of course, the phrase is the title of the Bergson's first major work, or first work. The standard English title of this work is Essai sur le don immédiat de la conscience, Time and Free Will. An essay on the immediate data of consciousness. It is the text that Sartre claimed attracted him to philosophy. Well, Time and Free Will has to be seen as an attack on Kant, for whom freedom belongs to the realm of outside of space and time. Because as space and time for him is the form of inner intuition. So and for Kant, freedom belongs to a realm outside space and time. But outside space and time as form of intuition, not a space and time as such. And also freedom as it belongs to. So what the freedom you're talking about, freedom in itself. Oh. So not all the freedom, just a freedom pure and simple. Bergson thinks that Kant has confused space and time in a mixture, with the result that we must conceive human action as determined by natural causality. Not necessarily human action as when it becomes the object of our perception or consciousness. Bergson offers a twofold purpose. Bergson offers a twofold response. On the other hand, Bergson offers a twofold response. On the one hand, in order to define consciousness and therefore freedom, why? Why therefore? Bergson proposes to differentiate between space, time and space. Well, they are differentiated in Kant as well, because space is the form of outer intuition. On the other hand, time is a form of inner intuition, but since outer intuition also comes inside, so it becomes, so time in a way is more, has a comprehensive role to play in Kant's thought, at least on the face of it. Bergson proposes to differentiate between time and space, to unmix them, we might say. On the other hand, through the differentiation, he defines the immediate data of consciousness as being temporal. It's temporal for Kant as well. In other words, as duration, as the duration, durée. In duration, there is no juxtaposition of events. Okay, that might be different from Kant. Therefore, there is no mechanistic causality. Well, in Kant, there's no mechanistic causality at that level either, because cause comes as a category comes that it doesn't belong to immediate consciousness or its data. It's the second or third level of it. Is in this duration that we can speak of the experience of freedom. So this is the experience of freedom, not freedom in you can have experience of freedom but not have freedom. For Kant, in a way, freedom is ontological in the sense that it's the condition of experience. So it's beyond experience. It's prior to experience, in a way. I don't know whether the way Kant is being portrayed here is Bergson or the author's interpretation of that. I wonder whether Bergson, in his book, does talk about Kant. I'll have to look back. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We're just trying to get a feel of it at this point. Okay. For Bergson, we must understand the duration as a qualitative. So duration is, he defines the immediate data of consciousness as being temporal, in other words, as the duration. So in duration, there's no juxtaposition between causality. For Bergson, we must understand the duration as a qualitative multiplicity. Why? As opposed to quantitative multiplicity. What's the difference between qualitative multiplicity and quantitative multiplicity? As the name suggests, a quantitative multiplicity enumerates things or states of consciousness by means of externalizing one from another in a homogeneous space. Okay. In contrast, a qualitative multiplicity consists in temporal heterogeneity, in which several conscious states are organized into a whole, permeate one another, and gradually gain a richer content. I don't think this is in any interesting sense different from Kant until this point. I think you can at least import into Kant this sort of way of reading. Because I said causality for Kant is something higher. It's a concept. Space and time are not concepts. And obviously, immediate data of consciousness at some point must be located in a space and situated in a time. But time has a priority in Kant as well, because although Space is the form of the outer consciousness or outer external things, consciousness of external things. But since we must confront or relate to outer things from within, everything passes through time as well. And that time is a pure form. And that's prior to causality and everything. Okay, Bergson even insists that the word several is inappropriate to qualitative multiplicity because it suggests numbering. Yeah, in Kant, tempo form of is not numbering. Number might presuppose that, but it is not the same thing as numbering. Bergson even said that several is inappropriate. Okay. Bergson provide examples of a quantitative multiplicity. The example of a flock of sheep is perhaps the easiest to grasp. To constitute a quantitative multiplicity which is always done out of a particular or utilitarian interest, one ignores the content of the space the items occupy, which results in the space being homogeneous. In the case of flock of sheep, one ignores the fact that the pasture in which they are feeding is beautiful and the fact that sheep are not strictly identical to one another. One focuses on what they have in common. That's true, but that level he's talking about the pre-conscious consciousness level. And I think Kant's form of intuition is prior to all that being possible. So what one is interested in is total number of sheep, be it for the meat or wool or production. We are able to enumerate them because each sheep occupies a discernible location within the field because they are juxtaposed to one another. Of course, the enumeration of sheep is represented by a symbol, a number. Similarly, a calendar or a clock is homogeneous form of time. But none of those things are Kant's intuition of form. The form of intuition, they presuppose the form of intuition. The idea of qualitative multiplicity is difficult to understand because that seems to me like a contradiction in terms. Quality of multiplicity as against quantity of multiplicity. It's difficult to understand because it hasn't been defined yet, although it is the heart of Bergson's thinking. So we are supposed to just have some sort of intuition gleaned from how he is talking. Normally we would think that there's a heterogeneity, there has to be juxtaposition. Juxtaposition and heterogeneity are secondary level concepts, I think. But in qualitative multiplicity there is a heterogeneity and no juxtaposition. Depend how you define juxtaposition. Qualitative multiplicities are temporal. So are quantitative. Qualitative multiplicity defines the duration. Okay. As with quantitative multiplicity, Bergson gives us many examples, but perhaps the most significant example is the feeling of sympathy. Feeling. Because in the 1903 Introduction to Metaphysics, Bergson defines intuition as sympathy. Feeling of sympathy. Here in Time and Free Will, he called it a moral feeling. Our experience of sympathy begins, according to Bergson, with us putting ourselves in the place of others. In feeling that, but Bergson continued, if this were all, the feeling would inspire in us abhorrence of others, and we would want to avoid them, not help them. But then one realizes that if one does not help the poor wretch, it is going to turn out that no one will come to my aid when I need help. So that's self-interest as well. There is a need to help the suffering. For Bergson, these first two phases are inferior forms of pity. In contrast, true pity is not so much fearing pain as desiring it. It is as if nature committed a great injustice, and what we want is not to be seen as complicitous with it. As Bergson said, the essence of pity is that need for self-abasement, an inspiration downward into pain. But this downward aspiration develops into an upward movement into the feeling of being superior. But this downward aspiration develops into an upward movement into the feeling of one feels superior because one comes to realize that one can do without certain sensuous goods. In the end, however, one feels humility and humble since one no longer needs and desires such sensuous goods. By denying ourselves of these goods, we in a way re-establish justice. Later, in the two sources of morality and religion, Bergson shows that the feeling of sympathy in fact progresses the point of love for all things. Sympathy comes. In any case, feeling of sympathy is a qualitative progress. It consists in transition from repugnance to fear, from fear to sympathy, and from sympathy to itself to humility. There is a heterogeneity of feelings there. The feelings are continuous with one another, they interpenetrate one another, and there is even an opposition between inferior needs and superior humility. If we try to juxtapose the feelings that is separate them, especially the feelings would have a different nature than when they interpenetrate. There would be no progress from one to the other. That is, from feeling of sympathy to love, etc. There would be isolated psychic states. Therefore, for Bergson, a qualitative multiplicity is heterogeneous or differentiated, continuous or unifying, oppositional or dualistic at the extreme, and most importantly temporal or progressive, an irreversible flow. Bergson also calls the characteristics of temporal progress mobility. This characteristic truly distinguishes duration from space, which is immobile. Okay, finally, because the qualitative multiplicity is heterogeneous, consciousness is given immediately. That is, without the mediation of symbols. For Bergson, perhaps this is the greatest insight: freedom is mobility. Condition of mobility? How can freedom be mobility? Because Bergson connects duration and mobility, in the second half in Deleuze and Foucault in particular, Bergson's concept of qualitative will be dissociated from time and associated with the space. Because Bergson connects duration and mobility. Because mobility is to do with the space, isn't it? That's true. Foucault at least reasserts the priority of space in a way. And perhaps that's why he's more Kantian than Bergson. So, it's talking about qualitative multiplicity. And it says that defines duration. The as with quantitative multiplicities, Bergson gives but perhaps the most significant example is the feeling of. So that's the example of qualitative multiplicity, that is the feeling of sympathy. Feeling of sympathy. Okay. So sympathy starts with feeling for others, putting ourselves in their shoes, so to speak. Okay. And from there we develop need to help others, because if we don't help them, we need that we help them, because we need help from them if we were in their position. So that seems to be the next stage related to the feeling for others. And these two phases he called inferior forms of pity. Okay. And from there we go on to a qualitatively different stage, to true pity, which is not fearing the pain, because that two stages came from the fear of pain, at least the second one, but desiring pain. Okay. I guess this is some sort of a phenomenological description of the phenomenon of human relations with itself and the others. And we desire pain because that's sort of a rebellion against nature. As he said, thus the essence of pity is thus a need for self-abasement and aspiration downward into pain, because we don't want to be complicitous with nature. Okay. But that goes into fourth stage. This downward has into being superior. Why? We are superior because we can reject, we can do without certain sensuous goods. So that means this sort of renunciation brings us back to our freedom from things, I guess. And that establishes, at least partially, our superiority over nature. By denying ourselves these goods, we are in a, so that's called justice, because nature punishes us, gives us suffering, and we, by denying nature, reclaim at least our partial freedom from nature. Okay, so this is supposed to be example of multiplicity, because in the same feeling of sympathy you have all these inferior qualities and its two phases, and true inferior pretty, true pretty, and then being superior. It's all are the shades of all are the shades of sympathy in a way, which seems very awkward and far-fetched. And I think then he says that it develops into love, because now we, after renunciation of the things, now we have desire those things along things again, but from a higher level of free longing, and that is love. So anyway, let's leave it there and just go back to text and finish that. And this is example of qualitative multiplicity, because it is heterogeneous or differentiated, continuous or unifying, oppositional or dualistic, at the extreme, and most importantly temporal or progressive, an irreversible flow from sympathy to love. Bergson also calls the last characteristics of temporal progress mobility. This characteristic truly distinguishes duration from space. Okay. In Introduction to Metaphysics, Bergson gives us three images to help us think about duration and therefore qualitative multiplicities, because as we saw, duration for him is qualitative multiplicity defines duration. So duration is an example of qualitative multiplicity, or the example. I'm not sure. Bergson gives us three. The first is that two spools with a tape running between them. One spool unwinding the tape, the other winding it up. During this discussion of Bergson, Heidegger focused. Oh, where did Heidegger come from? The first is that of two spools with a tape running between them. One spool unwinding the tape, the other winding it up. During his discussion of Bergson, Heidegger focuses on this image in his 1928 Metaphysical Foundations of Logic. Duration resembles this image. According to Bergson, because we grow older, our future grows smaller and our past larger. The benefit of this image is that it presents a continuity of experience without juxtaposition. Without juxtaposition. Yet there is a drawback. Because the tape moves between the two spools, the image presents the duration as being homogeneous, as if one could fold the tape back over its other part, as if tape were superposable, implying the two moments in consciousness might be identical. Because the tape moves between the two spools, the image presented as being homogeneous, as if one could fold the tape back over its other parts. Yet, as Bergson said, no two moments are identical in a conscious being. Duration for Bergson is a continuity of progress and heterogeneity. Moreover, thanks to this image, we can also see duration implies the conservation of the past. Indeed, for Bergson, and this is the center of his truly novel idea of memory, memory conserves the past, and this conservation does not imply that one experiences the same but difference. One moment is added into an older one, and thus when the next moment occurs, it is added on to all other older ones, plus the one that comes immediately before. What about the future? In comparison, therefore, the past collection of moments cannot be the same as the one immediately before, because the past is larger for the current moment than it was for the previous moment. Although Bergson does not say this, one might say that the Tuesday is different from Monday because Monday only includes itself on Sunday, while Tuesday includes Monday and Sunday. This first therefore implies that duration is memory. The prolongation of the past into the present. We shall return to the question of the memory below. What about the future? Does that constitute past or not, or present, and hence the past? The second image of qualitative is the color spectrum. So these are images of qualitative multiplicity. We saw in the first image of spools that there is a constant difference or heterogeneity. The color spectrum helps us understand this. Since the color spectrum has a multiplicity of different shades or numbers of or nuances of colors, here we have heterogeneity, but there is a drawback in the image as well. We lose characteristic of continuity or unity since the spectrum has colors juxtaposed. Bergson said pure duration excludes all idea of juxtaposition, reciprocal exteriority, and extension. What is juxtaposition anyway? So juxtaposition is placing things next to each other. In the color example, you can talk about juxtaposition, but in the memory example, there's no juxtaposition because you are talking about linearity in a way by talking about present, past, and future. Bergson's third image is an elastic band being stretched. Bergson tells us first to contract the band to a mathematical point where the present now, the now of our, then draw it out to make a line growing progressively longer. He wants us not to focus on the line but on action which traces it. If we can focus on the action of tracing, then we can see that the movement, which is duration, is not only continuous and differentiating or heterogeneous, but also indivisible. You want to have his cake and eat it as well. We can always insert breaks into the special lines that represent the motion, but the motion itself is indivisible. So you have a motion in itself, an apparent motion. For Bergson, there is always a priority movement or the things that move. Priority of movements or the things that move. The things that move is an abstraction from the movement. Now the elastic band being stretched is more exact image, but the image of elastic is still, according to Bergson, incomplete. Why? Because for him, no image can represent duration. something purely subjective or purely at the level of feeling. Later in creative, an image is immobile while duration is pure mobility. Later in creative evolution, Bergson will create the new art of cinema for producing immobile images of movement. As Deleuze will show in his cinema books, however, Bergson does not recognize the novelty of this art form. Cinema does provide moving images. In any case, in Introduction to Metaphysics, Bergson compares all three images. The unrolling of our duration, the spool, in certain aspects resemble the unity of movement which progresses. In others, the multiplicity of states spreading out the color spectrum. Now we can see that the duration really consists in two characteristics, unity and multiplicity. This double character brings us to Bergson method of intuition. Okay. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلي وسلم على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين برحمتك يا رب آمين آمين يا رب العالمين.